Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome this evening. It's really wonderful to see a packed audience. Those guys around the corner, you probably won't be able to see the stage, so come on in. And it's really nice to see that you guys have come forward. As I said, you know, it's one of the most disappointing things. You go into a big theater and all the students sit in the back. The same thing, we have an all-staff briefing, and all of the staff sit all the way in the back. So it's really good for you to be here. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome you to this live session, Predator-Free Futures, Innovation and Action. This is an area, as you all will be aware, that really puts New Zealand on the world stage. We are leaders in this space, and we have been for quite some time. And they look to us not only for innovation, but demonstrate that action actually makes a difference. New Zealand's native wildlife evolved without mammalian predators, leaving species like kiwi, kākā, and tuatara highly vulnerable. Since the arrival of humans, introduced pests such as possums, rats, and stoats have devastated ecosystems and remain one of the greatest threats to our biodiversity. At the forefront of tackling this challenge is Zero Invasive Pests, or ZIP, an organization dedicated to the complete removal of possums, rats, and stoats from large mainland landscapes and ensuring they never return. Their work is bold, innovative, and grounded in years of field-tested research, and it's helping us reimagine what's possible in predator control. Today's session will explore these innovations and what it takes to shift from sustained control to full eradication, even in the most complex environments. We'll look at the science, technology, and partnerships that are driving progress towards a predator-free Aotearoa. To begin, I'm delighted to introduce Lincoln University Professor James Ross, our Professor of Wildlife Management and Co-Director of the Center of Wildlife Management and Conservation. For over 20 years, James has focused his research on the sustained control of introduced mammalian pests in New Zealand. He coordinates the Masters of Pest Management and the Masters in Conservation programs here at Lincoln, and contributes his expertise to national initiatives, including what was the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, the Taranaki Maunga, Zero Invasive Predators and Pest-Free Banks Peninsula. James will open today's session with an overview of Lincoln University's research and partnerships in predator management, highlighting how innovation and collaboration are helping to transform the way we tackle one of New Zealand's greatest conservation challenges. Please join me in welcoming Professor James Ross.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to give a little bit of background, but something you might not know. So where is Tom? Over there. Tom was my former student over a decade ago, so it's really nice that I can actually introduce him now. It's great to see these guys out there doing the stuff we actually talked about over a decade ago now. So just as some of the background, so in my former life, basically, we were part of a research centre, so Chad talked about the centre, and we had funding, MB funding, and we were looking at that stage around new tools, so looking for alternatives to 1080 and brodifacoum, sort of the mainly widely used toxins on the mainland. And around that time, other things started to happen. So we started to see significant private investment in conservation. So the Next Foundation were one of these, and they were a couple of wealthy Kiwis that put 100 million of their own dollars into New Zealand conservation work. And in response to that, at that time as well, we also saw the government initiative, which was Predator Free New Zealand 2050 Limited, and they initially sought to match that private investment that was going on in conservation work as well. And then along came ZIP. And so 10 years ago, they were established with some of that early money that came along, and we had the Minister of Conservation come and open their facility here at Lincoln University. So money had run out on that previous program, but we had all that capability still based here at Lincoln, and we saw it as a really good opportunity to keep that going, to keep that initiative we had here going into the future. ZIP, though, as you might have said, he said, oh, my specialised in sustained control. ZIP have come along and pushed that even further. So they're looking now to develop technologies around removal of predators from large mainland areas, and then defending those areas. And I must say, selfishly, it's been a great collaboration to have Lincoln University and Zero Invasive Predators. So we've had 20 students now, graduates, that are either currently employed or have previously employed by Zero Invasive Predators. It's great to see my students going out and getting jobs in the area that they were trained in. We've had other students working part-time down there. We've also had a lot of collaborative research, so over 1,200 hours of time working with Lincoln postgrad students and staff projects. I think we're probably one of the biggest users of the Animal Ethics Committee. We've got over 120 ethics permissions held by them. It's also helped me with publications, with my student work and with Zero Invasive Predators works. We've had over 10 postgrad projects and summer scholars that have been supported by ZIP with their facility here. Again, you've helped me get external money, so we're able to leverage on what they're doing and what I'm doing to attract in more money. One of the other things that's really been enjoyable is we've had over 900 high school biology students that have come down, and we've taken them around the facility and talked to them about what we're doing with Predator Free. And it kind of works as a really nice little conduit. We have the CRIs just down the road as well. So there's us, there's the CRIs, Zero Invasive Predators, and other external organisations and agencies. Some of the stuff that I've done, so they wanted to talk about the Lincoln stuff. A lot of my research, more recent research, was about after you've done that control work, how do you find the last few animals? So we did quite a lot of work early on looking at detection. We looked at the DNA side of that, so using DNA to identify individual survivors from control. And I can see there's cacophony here as well. We kind of did some of the early thermal camera work, so now these guys are actually got a product thermal camera out on the market that you can actually use. And that was work that was funded through Osprey, which was formerly TB3. And some of the other work we're doing now with the students is the remove. So how do we actually then remove animals from large areas and do that consistently? Okay, then combined with the detection to pick them up. So we use a lot of the facility that ZIP has down there. They have a large outdoor observation pen. And my latest work, which is funded by Predator Free 2050, and I'm working alongside Pest Free Banks Peninsula, is around combination lures. So we have these new multi-kill smart traps that we're using now, combining lures to try and keep animals interacting with them the whole time. Well, that's my meagre research. So I'm going to hand over now to Tom, and he can talk about what these guys have been up to.
Before Tom actually takes stage, just a bit of a fun in history for those of you who don't know him. Our keynote today is Tom Agnew, Development Director at Zero Invasive Pests. Tom first joined ZIP in 2014 after completing his Master of Science in Biosecurity, Bioprotection, and Conservation Ecology here at Lincoln University. Since then, he's played a pivotal role in developing and testing new tools and techniques. First as Predator Behavior Team Lead, and now in his current role, helping to drive innovation across the organization. Tom works closely with ZIP's engineering team to take ideas from concept to implementation, and his leadership is helping accelerate progress towards achieving predator elimination goals. Alongside his technical expertise, Tom has a unique ability to connect with communities and other predator-free projects, ensuring that new knowledge and tools are shared across Ontario. Today, Tom will share insights from ZIP's on-the-ground projects, the latest tools and techniques being trialed, and what it takes to bring bold predator-free goals into reality. Hope you're talking about it. Anyway, please join me in welcoming Tom to the stage.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Chad and James. As James pointed out, I've spent a lot of time at this university. It's a very special place for me for many reasons. It's been pointed out that my undergraduate study here, that my postgraduate study here, but my roots to Lincoln run a lot deeper than that. I spent 3 years on the Students' Association, sorting out the service level agreement that still exists between the university and the Students' Association, so I'm awfully proud of that. I spent a few years on the Interleaders Scholarship, which is an awesome initiative. It's huge for me. And actually, I spent many years working from that bar, serving pints to students, orientation week events. Actually, that's where I met my fiance. It's a story for another day. But yeah, super special to be talking to you all today. for that reason, my deep connection to university. It's also really exciting because we're actually in the process of redesigning and rescoping the MOU that exists between ZIP and university. And so both parties are really, really keen to not just continue that partnership, but actually grow and enhance it and maybe work with different areas around the university into before. So Chad's helping us out with that process, and we're super excited to see where that leads in the future. And also the process of putting together a presentation about all the years we've spent here at Lincoln, a decade of research. It's just a good opportunity to reflect on what I've achieved, and it's special to share this room with a bunch of 20 students that have graduated and been employed by ZIP, and there's at least 3 or 4 of them. So yeah, it's really cool, and thanks for taking the time to listen to what we've got to say. But yeah, in terms of the presentation today, I really want to get across 3 things. I want to talk about the progress that ZIP's made in this innovation space around predator elimination. And the good news is we have made some progress. We've obviously got an awfully long way to go, but I want to give you some reassurance that we are heading in the right direction, not just as a company, but as an industry as well. I want to talk a lot about how Lincoln University and the facilities and the people of this place support that research and support that work. And it wouldn't be a development and innovation talk with hopefully some cool stuff. So I'll get into it. There's a pretty common saying amongst innovation that goes along with ones that we haven't really innovated anything until we have delivered tools and techniques into the hands of those that need it the most. And when I think about ZIP's core function as a business, that's what it's all about for us. We have operational field teams, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And our purpose really as a development team within ZIP is to give those guys the tools and techniques that they need to do their job, whether that's eliminating predators from Lucky Oyster Island, pest-free, predator-free southwest of what's one of our Lucky project. We can talk about those projects briefly as well as we go. I can't actually find the initial person to quote for that comment, but whoever it was, they must have told our CEO and my boss, Alberta, to go past a week since our notice and soul missions. For those that aren't so familiar, this is the ZIP team. When I first started with ZIP, we were a team of 9. I think I was the ninth man on Tim Schoberg, the middle row there. He just started just before me, but we had a really strict focus in the early days of ZIP, being focused on delivering tools and techniques to remove possums, rats, and stoats from large areas of mainland New Zealand. And the reason for that was New Zealand had had awesome success at eradicating pests from offshore islands. What we wanted to do was translate that success to the mainland of New Zealand so that those benefits of biodiversity and other things can be enjoyed by a community like you and me. So in the early days, real strict focus on R&D. As we grew and as we started to look at projects, we started to realise that there's quite a high level of specialisation, not just developing the stuff, but actually delivering it in place. And so we've had to change the business to actually start including operational delivery as part of our work program. And so I can say that as of this afternoon, we're up to a team of 99. Before we raised the bat. And earlier this year, in February, we actually celebrated 10 years anniversary, which is pretty cool as well and a good opportunity to reflect. Just a quick note here, we've got a whole lot of roles that are based all up and down the country, but specifically for Lincoln, this is where our development team's focused. We've got a base at Johnson Laboratory, we've got the facilities that James mentioned, the facility where a lot of our depth animal research into tools and techniques occurs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that work today. But Lincoln's been a really key capability, but not just for the students. So there are heaps of graduates of this place that go out into the world ready to make a difference in predator control. Just a little bit in terms of where ZIP's working. So ZIP leads the delivery of 3 large landscape scale projects. So just to go through them sequentially, so we've got predator-free southwestern project started back in 2018. We actually didn't get any work underway until 2019. Long reasons for that, but that's a project that's now entering its last year of delivery of predator elimination before it gets turned into a maintenance phase. It sort of encompasses a lot of that sort of proto-carver head forest, but it also now includes 15,000 dairy farmland. It includes townships such as Franz Joseph, Openito, Whenua, big urban and rural component to these projects that we're working on now, and also lowland forest too, which has its own unique challenges when it comes to predator elimination. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about innovations to support predator southwestern today, so we'll get into that in a bit. The other projects that we lead are the Te Maunahuna Aoraki project, which actually shares a back boundary with the predator-free southwestern project. I should have mentioned the project area for southwestern is 107,000 hectares. The project area for Te Maunahuna Aoraki is 310,000 hectares, although peaking a little bit because the 2 lakes should take up 60,000. Clever marketing on our behalf, but huge project area. To give you an idea of the difference between those two projects, Predator-free South Westland encompasses 600 individual landowners. Each one of those landowners, one-on-one conversation, planning for the project, signing up for tool use on their properties. Some of their parcels of land are 50 square metres out in Operita, and some of them are 2,000 hectare dairy farms. So lots and lots of landowner engagement. On the other side of the hill, Te Manahuna, 310,000 hectare project area, 14 landowners, primarily large station holders like Glenmore Station, closely with. Te Manahuna is also split into two distinct project areas. So we've got the High Alpine, which is currently the multi-brun range and the leopard range. And the opportunity that sits in front of the Department of Conservation at the moment is the potential to do a range like Kiwi, kākā, which encompasses Tauraki Mount Cook. If that project was to go ahead, we'd be looking at 75% of the Tauraki National Park locked up in Australia, which would be pretty special. The really cool part for me in Te Manahuna is actually this little portion in the bottom corner out in the front country. So that's Glenmore Station, and that's where Zip's focus, I suppose, in terms of target species shifted a little bit back in 2022. So when that project came online, we didn't just become zero invasive predators, we also started things like hares, rabbits, hedgehogs, which are obviously a predator as well. But our scope of species taking quite extended, and with that came a whole lot of new innovation as well. And then more recently, in terms of last year, Zipper announced the delivery agent for the Predator-free Whenua project. All of these, I should say, are also collaborations between zero invasive predators and various bodies. Obviously, DOC are a huge part of this work, mana whenua, but also the likes of regional councils and individual landowners. Just gives you a bit of a scope of the places that the species that we're working with. This one's quite a basic picture, I suppose, but it's one that, unless you spend a bit of time around the industry, it can be a little bit hard to get your head around. But this is kind of Zip's approach to predator elimination on the mainland. And so the first thing that we do before we start any work is identify block boundaries. And what we're looking for are really strong either geographical or physical boundaries to try and stop re-incursion back into the block. Key difference, obviously, between elimination on the mainland versus eradication on offshore islands is on an offshore island, it's a big sea boundary, we've got limited number of people transiting to and from that site. And so the chances for biosecurity incursions are much less. But we're working with 600 individual landowners, even within the Zip team, we've found 3 or 4 rats hiding in the bottoms of people's cars about kākā, so that biosecurity risk is constant. And so that's why I talk about elimination versus eradication. It's a whole, it's a big topic across the predator-free industry, but it's all right, leave that one there. So setting those block boundaries is really important. For us on the West Coast, it's things like those high mountain ranges, strong rivers on the West Coast. And something like Te Manahuna, Hauraki, it might be adaptations of predator fencing or rabbit and hedgehog specific fencing. So that's what we do first. Next is we establish our surveillance system. I think sometimes it's common for those surveillance systems to go in after the work's been completed, the removal work. For us, the surveillance system goes in first, because it means when we do that initial removal, we put ourselves in a really good position to respond to any survivorship or quick incursion that comes back into our blocks. Then we go about removing the predators across the entire block. That usually starts with some sort of widespread initial knockdown technique. I'll talk about a couple of those today, which is then followed up with much more targeted, specific response techniques. And again, we'll have a look at a couple of those as well. Obviously, I've talked about the high likelihood of incursion, and so we spend a lot of our time managing that incursion, detecting incursion events, and responding and snuffing those out before they become growing populations and problematic. And the thing that I really like about this work is throughout all of this process, community consultation begins right at the start and keeps going a long time after you've finished the actual delivery work. And I've actually added my own jot into the bottom of this work, which is innovation. That starts at the start as well and continues long into the future, because that's how we drive the maintenance cost of these projects down, with that innovation at the back end. What that looks like in practice, this is a very simple graphic that's been put together to try and explain that. There's our block boundaries, there's our initial removal, survivorship of a possum, we detect that on our camera network, we respond to it and snuff that out. Then we've got these boundary areas which we know are going to be leaky, even really strong rivers will still leak rats and possums. So we've got incursion coming back across. We look for individual possums and individual stoats. We realise that designing a detection network to detect individual rats is almost impossible or very expensive, and so what we're looking for here is breeding events of rats. I'll talk very briefly about how that works later. And what happens is when you do the next block in the sequence, you actually take out that internal boundary and you push that buffer zone further away. So here people in our industry talk a lot about buffer versus core areas. Core areas we're trying to hold at predator freedom. Bucket areas we acknowledge that we're always going to have, but we're going to have tools to make sure they don't make it back into the core area. I'm going to zoom you in now on predator-free southwestland. So as I talked about before, for those of you who don't know where it is, we're bordered by the Tuatara River to the north, Tuatara Township, down to the Waiau River in the south, where Franz Joseph Township is, for those that have been here in the bottom corner. This is the Glacier Valley up here. So Franz Joseph on average receives between 300 and 400,000 a year. It's a pretty high use type of the location in the country. Huge variety of land use types in here. You can see the 15,000 hectares of productive dairy farm land. You can see some of the townships. You can see the lowland forest out to the coast. This block in the sort of bottom left corner is actually the Operato Kiwi Sanctuary. So that's where the Department of Conservation has been maintaining the growing kiwi population for a long, long time. To the north of that is the North Operato Forest, which was selectively logged throughout the sort of 70s and 80s. It's actually known as the pink rocker of southwestland, so that's where a lot of the locals go to film. So all of these kind of complexities and challenges coming together in one place alongside working alongside 600 landowners and working out what tool suite works for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those innovations are that have enabled us to deliver this work in southwestland. So the first one I'm going to touch on is some of those initial removal tools. And one of the things that's been key to the success of ZIP over the years has been the development of an adaptive methodology known as 1080 to 0. I hear it talked about sometimes as a description, but each time we roll out 1080 to 0, it changes. Unfortunately, the reality of conservation in New Zealand, 1080 remains one of the #1 tools in the toolkit. What ZIP's really interested in is using it in a way that allows us to get out of the long-term cyclic use of 1080. By using it once, using it well, and adapting some of the approaches to how we deliver it. And so a couple of those examples are, when we deliver these 1080 0 operations, for those that aren't familiar, a standard 1080 operation to knock a pest population down will be a single phase. It'll involve a single pre-feed, which is used to cue animals onto a bait type, and there'll be a single toxin phase, which is delivered on top of that. We do 2 phases, and each one of those phases is preceded by 2 pre-feeds, so lots and lots of opportunities for animals to cue onto the bait. Inherently much more expensive to deliver. What we're aiming for is a really limited number of survivors. We always get survivors with that tool, but a limited number of survivors in areas where we can deal with them with more selective targeted tools, stuff those out, and then we've got a core area that we might be able to hold for a long time. To give you an idea of how that's going, 107,000 hectare project area in southwestland, now treated 88,000 footprint, and 55,000 hectares of that project area have now been removed from the long-term cyclic use of 1080 into some sort of stage of 1080 freedom. So that's really, really exciting. Less toxin into the environment, better connection with mother fennel. It's a better approach when it comes to interest in this type of work. And we've still got a lot of work to do. The other thing is we've got to make sure that we get bait into every single nook and cranny of that project area, or some sort of device to do the job to every nook and cranny of that project area. And so with a standard operation, you'll use a broadcast helicopter bucket. You'll have a big safe line drawn off that so the bait doesn't go into the dairy farm or doesn't go into the road. And whatever gap is left in between, we know that there's going to be survivor rats and possums in that area, and we just deal with that as it breeds back up. With 1080 to 0, we target every last bit of habitat. And so this map in the middle here actually shows a baiting drone operation where we've used an agricultural drone to bait a half a hectare patch of bush right on the edge of the most productive dairy farm in Franz Joseph. So obviously can't afford to put bait on the other side. Fence line, got to be super accurate with that bait placement. And so we use that drone, which is a more accurate tool for the job than say a helicopter. All of this work is not possible without the big regulatory piece that goes alongside it, working with our local doc office, working with the permissions team within ZIP to deliver the best outcome possible. Sometimes, the operations need to be taken off the road, so the drone itself was really, really effective, but the pack up and pack down process was taking us so long, was actually making it a really ineffective tool. One of the things we developed was the drone truck, which is essentially a tool which carries our drone around State Highway 6. We worked with the regulators at NZTA to have permission to be able to pull this off on the road corridor. And basically what we do is we fly the drone off the back of the truck. We go and bait those really negative areas alongside alongside the highway or alongside the river where we're not putting any bait. And then when the drone's finished the job, it comes back down, lands on the back of the truck, off to the next side and we're into it. And this was an innovation that was born out of a need to reduce the cost of delivering an operation, and it was stood up within 4 months. So just shows what's possible when you get the right people working together. You've got the engineers, you've got technologists, you've got regulatory people, all driving towards the same outcome. Cut through that. So what about those areas where we can't use zero today? Because there are plenty of them, even somewhere like predator-free South Westland, which is 90% public conservation land. There are still large sections, a la these dairy farms, where the use of aerial alternate is not an option. So we've had to develop a tool suite to deliver particularly rat elimination on the ground. So sometimes that's trapping, sometimes that's ground-based toxins. And so this particular development I'm talking about here is the use of an automated dispenser to release a gel-based version of a rat bait into a bait tunnel. So when we did Friends Joseph, it was about 2,000 hectares of farmland. We had about 4,000 to 5,000 bait stations that our rangers were servicing weekly in that project area. And that labour cost of just getting our bait stations, it's just absolutely killing us. And so when we took on the 13,000 hectares of the Pottara farmland, looking at 30,000 plus bait stations. So we developed this little device which is sitting on top of our bait station down the bottom there. It's known as H2Zero. It's got a little hydrogen cell in the cap of the device. When it's orientated the right way up and screwed into the bait tunnel, it starts a chemical reaction producing hydrogen gas, which forces the little plunger down into our gel-based toxin, and then we sort of have a slow release of the toxic bait into the tray below. We put it in a bait tunnel that's rat specific and rat targeted, so we can nicely get rats going into those devices, but it excludes some of our non-target species like hare, like kiwi, which are in the area, but also non-target species like stock. You know, we've got dairy cattle and beef cattle in this area, trying to protect against access to toxins as well. So really, really cool. A device that now we're mass producing. We've made about 10,000 of these devices. They're starting to go out into other projects now as well. So predator-free Wellington are starting to use H2Zero to tackle their rat challenges in and around Peninsula and predator-free Wellington. And all up, you're looking at a device that costs $35 to $40 to put together in the field versus the cost of sending a ranger out to a bait station on average 12 times, sometimes in awful West Coast conditions. Big regulatory piece around this as well, obviously, not just the use of this tool on private land around stock and around farming operations, but also working with the department to access tools like this for use on public conservation land as well. Just jumping across the hill very quickly, I mentioned that 4,000 hectares where we were delivering an elimination project for, say, hedgehogs, hares and rabbits. One of the tools that's been really, really successful for us there in knocking down and finishing the job for hedgehogs and rabbits in particular has been the development of a thermal drone technology. So thermal drones are not particularly new, but it's a technology that's continuously evolving, and some of the thermal detectors on drones are getting better and better as we go. What we've now got is a situation where the team will make a detection of, say, a hedgehog or a rabbit on a camera, whether it's an AI camera or a trail camera, and then we'll plan a targeted response using a thermal drone. So the drone will go out with the hunter, they'll systematically fly that area where the detection was made, and then they'll identify their target and using a combination of shooter and a drone pilot, hopefully take the animal out. And this little video just shows you, without the use of the drone, this is a experienced light shooter. He's sitting right in front of the hedgehog, hiding behind the tussock. Can't see it. He's even using his thermal gear, but the whole time the drone's got eyes on that target. And you'll see eventually as he moves around one side of the tussock, the hedgehog scoots around the backside. Shooter still can't see it. He's got a key piece on, so he's got direct eyes. I love Shooter's real particular about his work and very fussy, but he'd be horrified that I was showing you this work. But the part of the video I cut off is the part that we don't need to show. It's obviously, we're in this game for biodiversity benefit, for biodiversity value. Unfortunately, the reality of conservation in New Zealand is if we want to protect something, whether it's kiwi, tuatara, as we mentioned earlier, unfortunately that means generally we have to kill something, whether it's a stoat or whether it's a possum or whether it's a rat. And so one of the things that drives a lot of our innovation is trying to find more effective in terms of they're better at trapping rats or better at trapping stoats, but also more humane and safer tools for not just trapping but toxic use as well. And so one of the things that Tim and I did in the early days of SIP was we did a lot of welfare testing, kill traps, commonly available kill traps on the market. We saw some really, really interesting things. We saw just how effective some of these tools like Adopt 200 is. But we also saw really surprising things. I'll just play you this video. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you a rat getting trapped. So this is a rat entering a very common conservation trap used all over New Zealand. It's got the peanut butter in the back, sets the trap off. That's a big kill bar that usually comes flying down on top of the rat. Finishes the job, nice and tidy. What you've just seen is a rat being able to set a trap off and back out of the trap before being struck. It's an interaction that had never been witnessed before until, we thought the testing inside the laboratory facility to do this welfare work. But what it's led us on is a 5-year journey to try and develop a trap that's more humane, that doesn't have this risk of animals escaping. Because one of the things we're concerned about, obviously, is half striking an animal or somebody killing an animal, which is horrible, but also the interaction that this rat has just had. What impact does that have on its behaviour long term? Is it more less likely now to go into another kill trap? And so the picture on the bottom right is rat and stoat trap known as the zip-in. It works slightly differently to most of the striking or strangling kill traps on the market. It actually uses a laboratory approved delivery of CO2 gas, euthanasia agent. Won't go into grim details of how that all works, but that's an example of working with the vets at the university at the time to try and find the most humane way of putting animal into food usage. And then a stack load, thousands of that's now used all over the country, really, and hopefully delivering more humane endpoints for some of the animals that we're trying to track. We work really closely with Willowbank Wildlife Reserve. A lot of our devices in the prototype stage go out to Willowbank, and the purpose of that is twofold. One is trying to make sure we're making signing devices, they're not going to get shredded and pulled apart by Alpine and Southwestern TMAC. And believe me, that's a difficult challenge for an engineer to overcome. But we're also trying to make sure that whatever we're putting out in the environment isn't likely to harm those animals as well. So those interactions of Willowbank are really, really important. And I think this is a really good slide just to pay thanks, I suppose, to the Animal Ethics Committee. I know we put in a stack load of really wonderful applications, but we really couldn't do this work without that. Not backstop, it's more than that, it's more interactive, and you help us deliver better trials because of it. And obviously, James plays a big role in that too with the dietitian's recommendations. So thank you guys very much. In terms of, so we've covered off a lot of the initial removal, maybe some of those follow-up specific tools, but before any of that happens, we've first got to know what's happening in the environment. One of the key innovation changes in the predator control industry, probably in the last 6 or 7 years, has been the switch from, say, traditional tools like chew cards, whack sticks, which some of you will be familiar with, which still have their place in pest control, to more sensitive methods of detection like trail cameras, game cameras. These things have been pretty revolutionary, especially when they're paired up with a way of freshly dispensing a lure in front of them so that we provide this animal back in front of the camera. There are lots of automated dispensers on the market. It's been one of the most productive areas of the predator-free movement, but so have a couple. The first one we developed, which is the metal box on the tree in the circle there, is what we call the motor lure. It works by driving oil down into a syringe full of mayonnaise, and then it's very fresh on the mayonnaise. It's deposited at the same time every night at the back of the tree. And what that means is that if a stoat or a rat or a possum turns up and gets a food and it's more likely to come back with subsequent nights, it also means that they've got a chance to target it in the location going forward. And it means that we can pair it up with a trail camera, which sits about 2 meters away, attached to a tree or a tower or a fence post. And it gives us this really good detection data, not just for pest species. This trail camera data has been really useful for us. What's going on in the biodiversity area as well. We've also taken that same hydrogen cell gas dispenser and turned that into a mayonnaise version as well. You can see the possum on its back trying to access some of the mayo from one of the dispensers. So yeah, really key invention. A couple of challenges with trail cameras, which has led us to develop a different tool. But the challenges with trail cameras are they're fantastic, but we've got to replace the batteries. For us, we replace the batteries in our trail cameras every 6 weeks. We have about 1,550 devices spread out across the predator-free Southwestern project area. So the service of each one of those devices every 6 weeks gets really expensive, especially when some of these locations helicopter flight into the backcountry. So alongside that, they also generate an awful lot of footage. Predator-free Southwestern project alone, we've generated now 11 million individual camera images. Each one of those has been reviewed by a field ranger, so that stuff takes time. But probably the biggest problem with trail camera detection is that it results in a lag time in terms of when you respond. So if I put a camera in tonight and I don't get back to it in 6 weeks, and it detects a rat tonight, I'm now 6 weeks behind in responding. And we know that the species like rat, that can be actually looking at a generational period, and the population's already away on us. And so What we've developed is the zip thermal AI camera. Again, James mentioned the helicopter camera as well. Some exciting development that's been enabled by the predator fruit in this space. This is our version. So setup orientated, looking down at the ground. Again, we've got that automated luring device under it, which is dragging animals to that location. For us, the orientation is quite key because the way our AI model works is it looks at a set space on the ground, and that helps the camera determine what it's looking at. So it's got two PIR sensors that extend out beyond the field of vision of the thermal detector unit. When one of those PIR sensors is triggered, the camera fires up. It takes a 30-second video clip, which looks a little bit like this. This is a animal moving under a AI camera. That little box on top beside the possum is the percentage count that camera has confidence that it's looking at that species. So you can see at some point it gets up to 98, 99, nearly 100% confident that yes, what I'm looking at is a possum. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of AI training has gone into this. And the really cool thing is, again, Lincoln University has enabled this work because we use our facility down the road to do a lot of this initial prototype testing of the device, but an awful lot of AI species training as well. In fact, we've got a Lincoln University student at the moment adding things like hairs and rabbits and hedgehogs to our AI species model. So we've talked about the great tool that we've had for the last 5 years. We've talked about the new tool that we're starting to use more and more in our projects. But what about some of those future projects, those future tools that we might be able to use for detection? AI cameras are great. They still result in a piece of infrastructure on the hill that requires servicing every year. What if we didn't have to have infrastructure on the hill? We could use something like eDNA to do the detection for us. Maybe not everywhere, maybe not on those buffer areas where we're dealing with incursion, but maybe in those core areas where we're getting more and more confident that there's actually nothing there, and anything that turns up will be a biosecurity event. So we've got a big piece of work in a development project involved in trying to understand how eDNA could be part of the predator control and predator elimination toolkit. It's quite a young science, but one of the things that we've learned is when rats are really, really dense in the environment, we don't need very many samplers at all to be able to detect them. So each one of these samplers, we use a process called metabarcoding, which gives us the full picture of what species have contributed genetic material to that sample that we pull out. So you can see that when we're dealing with higher numbers of rats in the environment, we only sort of need 1 to 2 samples to tell us whether that's or not. The challenge for predator elimination is when you get right up this end all the way towards 0, you can see how many samples you need to be really confident that there's something there to find, you're going to find it. So you're looking at, the best part of 18 samples. The closer you get towards 0, each one of those samples costs $230. One of the really exciting developments that Agnew University, have been involved with in this space has been the development of rat-specific assays, and actually rat species-specific assays. So we can now do qPCR tests, so just look for rats, or just look for kiwi or Norway or ship rat. And so the really cool thing about those tests is they're an awful lot cheaper. So those are like $20 versus so 10 cheaper. So although this is a developing technology, it's new for us. I think this has real promise in the future. And actually, this is an area we're really excited to explore a bit more. A couple of just things to finish up with on sort of pest animal behaviour. One of the things that these predator-free sites, predator-low environments allow you to do is test what animals get up to when they are truly lonely in the environment. This is a piece of work that we did at our Bottle Rock Peninsula field site. So I mentioned before those 3 project areas we're running, covering now nearly 600,000 hectares of size. Where it all started for Zip, we don't start at 600,000 hectares. We started at 400 hectare peninsula in Wonga Sounds. And one of the things we were trying to do at that location was test a trap barrier to see if we could stop incursion from possum tracks and stoats back onto a previously cleared peninsula. So that's that blue area in the middle. One of the pieces of work that Tim and I were involved in the early days, which was so much fun and really interesting, and gave me a huge appreciation for the stoat as a species, was releasing radiogenically tagged individuals into this environment and testing how effective our barrier system was at intercepting stoats. The short story of it was rubbish. It was no good at intercepting stoats. The reason for that is that they can just cover huge distances in a very short space of time. And I'll flick over to the next one. This is one individual that we released onto the peninsula on the 21st of January. And over a period of 2 months, he covered 42 kilometres of the peninsula wider area. And some of his movements were up to 2 to 3 Ks in a single 24-hour period. So what does all this mean? Why do we do this kind of research? Well, it helps us determine what our detection and our response strategies need to look like for stoats. We know that we're dealing with a highly mobile individual. They're quite sparse in the landscape, but they will cover big distances. And one of the things that we learned was that food lures are great if we get them to the same location. They are so clever that scent-based lures or social lures, you've got one chance only to get them. Otherwise, you won't see them again on a estrus bedding lure as soon as they rise into bait. So all of this kind of research, I suppose, contributes to designing better systems for achieving food domination. What about the Te Mana Huna project? Well, if you pick up the mammal handbook, the New Zealand Mammal Handbook, it'll probably tell you that a male rabbit will hold a home range size of about 2 to 3 hectares. But what happens to that male's home range once all of his mates have been removed and they're looking for a companionship or something else? Well, they massively extend their home range. So this is a GPS collared rabbit that we released into a cleared area of Glenmore Station. You can see he starts off in an area of about 15 to 20 hectares at one point. Then he totally moves over to another side of the block and covers off another 10 to 15 hectares. And all up, he's covering about 40 hectares area independently. And he's doing this huge foray almost every night over 900 metres between those sites. And so this is what happens to animals when you move all of their mates from the system and they're truly lonely. It's actually a really good thing when it comes to designing detection networks because it means we can afford to spread our devices out slightly more. Obviously, we'll have a good chance of detecting them. If we saw behaviour where they parked up at the same spot and they didn't move, then that would be much, much more concerning. Same things with possums. If they have mates, if they have partners, they can hold up in 6 to 10 per hectare. As soon as they're lonely, like on Peninsula, they can cover up 100 hectares in a month. So huge changes in animal behaviour. And again, all of those research learning by the attention of Lincoln University, Ethics Committee, expertise that sits in this room and outside. Oh, by the way, if anyone knew that rabbits could cross cattle groups, we certainly didn't, and it's causing us a bit of grief at the moment. So I think what's going on is I know we can stop rabbits from crossing cattle groups on all these. We don't just hit and hope with this stuff. There's, I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail today, but what gives us confidence in a zero result? Because I think this has been one of the obvious and easy criticisms of the predator movement is how can you guys be sure that we've actually got to the outcome? For us, it all comes back to a percentage confidence. So the first thing, and again, the Lincoln University facility that we got here was so pivotal to this research. We spent a lot of the early days of understanding shipwreck breeding behaviour and the behaviour of individuals from a nest. So when a mother has babies and they have a generation-wide breeding event, how far and how fast do those sort out? How detectable are they in different life stages? And then we took the work from university and our kids here to the field and asked, and we released their mother and their pups into the environment and tracked their movement over time. And what that's allowed us to do, in addition to a whole lot of literature that goes in here as well, is develop a model that tells us how likely we are to detect rats with a detection network on any given density. So for us in large places of South Westland, we use an AI camera network density of 1 per 35. We know now that through tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of iterations of our model, based on how detectable we think shipwrecks are, that if we have no detections for 9 months, camera network that's 1 per 35 hectares, we can be 96% confident. So it's not saying that we're 100% confident. We'll probably never be able to say that, but we do get more and more confident the more time that goes on since we last had detection. And I mentioned it very quickly earlier on, but one of the other key pieces of our language is we talk about core versus buffer areas. This is the Perth River block on the right-hand side that I talked about a little bit earlier on. This was a picture that was put into our impact report for that project at the back end of last year. At the time, we were dealing with incursions for rats on the river boundary edge to the top of the project area. This little blue dot in the middle there, which looks totally out of place in the middle of the core, it's actually smack bang on the middle of Scott Hut. It's a hunting hut in the block. And so, although we can't say for sure, one of the things that we think might happen there is it's a biosecurity event. It's come in with the helicopter, it's come from after. But also it could be a survivor if we haven't detected it through that initial operation. But the key thing is we have now detected it and we can now respond. So why do we do it? Why do we bother? Well, this is the reason that we bother. This is the stuff. So although, you know, some of the goals and some of the objectives have changed over the years, the one thing that remains is our biodiversity focus. So, you know, we have seen an incredible shift in the biodiversity of a place like South Westland since we started working there. Even the areas that we're still working, we haven't got to zero yet. Biodiversity lift has been incredible. One of the key indicator species for us has been this bird on the left-hand side, kākā, for those that aren't familiar. really, really rat and stoat sensitive. Anywhere where you've got rats and stoats, very unlikely to get kākā. We've got locals in Okarito Township, which is smack bang in the coast in the middle of the Okarito bush, that have never seen kākā in their 20 or 30 years in Okarito. They're now seeing flocks of 20 and 30 of them feeding. They go for the Okarito trick. We recently took a group of Ngāi Tahu representing senior leadership into the back country in the Perth block to show them some of the bounce back of the forest and the biodiversity. And their kākā stopped us at our tricks because he was too busy listening to the sounds coming from the forest behind it. So pretty cool moment to be able to bring some of these iconic species. Not bad, they've always been there, but now they're doing an awful lot better. Theo is a great example. Again, the Department of Conservation have recently released Theo individuals back into the Perth River block. Theo are doing really, really well. Again, another species that gets hammered by stoats, unfortunately. The Roe kiwi chip example is so cool. So I mentioned before the Agnew kiwi sanctuary out the coast of Okarito. DOC have done an incredible job managing and keeping that species on the planet because these guys just get hammered by stoats. Each year, the department used to catch 200 stoats in and around the edges of Okarito kiwi sanctuary. It still has incursion of stoats. It's still right on the edge of our boundary, but the combination of the department and its work in that area, the introduction of tools like the zipper that I showed you earlier, has meant that the last two Roe kiwi breeding seasons have been the most successful on record. They had survivorship of 55% the year previously, and last year they had survivorship at over 70%. Niche fact, but if you want to grow a Roe kiwi chick population, you need to be at 22% kiwi chick survival. Any less than 16% of the population is going backwards. So when you're operating at 55 and 70%, the Roe population is starting to do really, really well. Another niche fact, for the first time last year, they had more predations of kiwi chicks from Kia than they did stoats. We had one predation event within the project area from stoat, and we had 3, unfortunately, from Kia. But that's the return to nature, that's the return to normal. That's what it should be. On the right-hand side, a couple of different ones, I suppose. One's been the bounce back of the forest. Last year was an awesome year for rata. Awesome year for rata in the southwestern footprint area where we've removed possums, but it was an awesome year for rata everywhere. We do have a project at the moment, the Native Carbon Initiative. So it's a ZIP project, but we're working with industry representatives from the Department of Conservation, from MFE, from Agnew, and others from SILE and NIWA, to try and understand are we able essentially to prove a link. There is a link there to be found between the bounce back of the forest, browser management, and an increase in carbon stock. So early days for us, who knows where it's going to end up, but it's a cool piece of research to be involved in. And the top picture is also, especially fitting for Lincoln University. What happens to the agriculture industry when you start moving rabbits from 4,000 hectares of a high country station? Well, the animal score and the condition starts to get better, and you start to be able to put more stock onto those lands and things. So there's a really nice opportunity, I think, to work closely with Lincoln University on some of that high country discrimination. For those that haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to go and go through the Free Southwest website. Up there, we've got an impact report. This is essentially a warts and all look at the data that we've from our trail camera and our AI camera networks over time. It also includes a lot of our biodiversity impacts, those are both positive and the occasional instances where we haven't quite got right. One of the really cool pieces of work that I've been lucky enough to be involved in, and again, it's got roots within Lincoln University, has been how we measure care populations, how well care are doing within the southwestern footprint area. And so when we first started, obviously I talked to you earlier about the double phase 1080 operations that's at home for predator-free work. And the concern was at the time, because of those double phases, because of 1080 in the environment, that we were going to have a bigger impact on care populations. We know when we do suppression operations that we will impact a certain number of care. So what we set out to do with the help of the technical crew and the Department of Conservation is work out a way that we can manage and measure, firstly mitigating the risk to care in those alpine environments, but also measuring how those care track through these operations. What we've come up with is a metric which uses flock size in front of cameras as a method to determine how the population is doing. We use tar carcasses as a description and an additional food source. So we put tar carcasses up on the high points before we do our baiting operations. We drag the care up there, we give them a high protein feed. At those locations, we're also feeding them a non-toxic bait type which has a bird repellent in it. One of the benefits of working with care is that highly intelligent animals, so you can actually train them off bait. And so through a combination of those tools, that forms the ZIP TA to Zero mitigation package for care. What we've seen in terms of results is an increase over time in the flock size of care that we're seeing on cameras year on year. So this is now an exercise that we repeat every year. The confidence intervals on these flock size numbers are so small because the number of images that we generate in each camera across a wide area are in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So yeah, we know that care are doing really well. The good news is we haven't impacted the care population through our work. We've actually helped grow it. In the last 5 years since we've been working in South Westland, the population in this area was estimated to be about 50 before we started. Since then, DOC had banded 374 individuals. So we know that, yeah, luckily we've got a mitigation package that works to protect these species when we do our operations, but also, as we thought, this work is beneficial for a really special type of species like kia. And to that effect, this is another really cool piece of research because one of the desires of whenua, particularly Ngāi is a limited interaction with our tonga species and handling of our tonga species. And so by that, I mean, Ngāi would prefer that we don't have birds, they don't look at birds. So working with them and working with DOC, we've now found that we don't have to have birds, we can just be using the same tools. So that's been a really cool piece of work. And lower on the birds. So yeah, just to recap, this is just a very quick glimpse at the decade of innovation and research that's happened for us at this place. It really is such a special link between ZIP and the university. You know, pretty much all of the things that I've talked to you about today have some sort of root back to the Lincoln facility, people who work here, whether it's relying on James and his care expertise, and you know, whether it's access to the facilities or it's access recently to the food scientists to keep a good formulation of gel baits that might be dispensable with things. It's all across the university. I think it's opportunities to grow, which is really exciting. And yeah, just a final head tip to you, James. Super proud. We've made huge amounts of it. It's actually between James and Land. It's pretty much you two. Thank you very much.
Manage that because of course you're from university, but any questions?
Yes, good question. Yes, so we, you know, up until 2 years ago, I would have beaten that question away because we had a very tight focus on possum, rats, and stoats. But obviously, with the whenua eradication project coming under our delivery, particularly the predatory whenua project coming under our delivery, feral cats are on the menu. And thank you for making the distinction of feral cats and domestic hobbies. But so what that means is the same level of innovation development to stoats tools to put out into the environment. We're now going to do the same process for feral cats. I don't know if you're familiar, but very recently, SOP and the Department of Conservation delivered the first ever feral 1080 operation on Stoat Island. And the purpose of that operation was to target feral cats to make sure that the continuity of the New Zealand southern dotterel didn't disappear off the planet. So yeah, it's a space that's growing and pretty free. It has been the slowest of the species to kind of keep up with the movement. And I think a lot of that is socially driven, but the thing of setting up these projects is more and more we're seeing damage to cats. Those of us that have been in the industry for a long time know those, but I think now the general public are also starting to understand that, hey, we can make this distinction in something so about these feral cats. I would say that the tool suite is a couple of years behind the rest. We know that there's, you know, intelligent and sleazy stoats are cats are another player up above that. So yeah, we'll put everything kind of stuff on our radar. Well, that is the thing that works in our favour, right? Is when you, when you target rats, any operation, a ground-based verification operation, you will generate toxic carcasses, which will then put stoats and cats at risk. And Mackenzie Basin project, we've got those 4,000 hectares of farmland, not cats specifically, but overnight we took out the ferret population block because they either had nothing left to eat, so they disappeared, or they ate poison carcasses.
pretty much excluded. It's just graceful. So native species.
The cats or the
Yeah,
stoats.
you can take that. So.
Yeah, for the challenge with animals like cats and stoats is because they're so wide ranging. When we're working on 4,000 hectares of animal station, we can take cats out of 4,000 hectares, but next week there'll be a bunch more that come back into the block. And so until you start operating at proper scale, once you start operating at scale, that's when I think you take on some of those high level predators. So like South Westland, we've created a core area that's free of stoats, but there's still lots of stoats around here. Or something like Tim's project on Banks Peninsula, when you start working at 8,000 hectares, quite a bit spent, you can actually create a core area you can hold, but until you work at scale, it's really hard to get those high. So yeah, that is amazing.
And Crystal, it's about you mentioned the care with olive bait.
Yeah.
So is it too expensive to just always use it?
I think that, in terms of like suppression operations, department operations, I think that comes into it, the cost. There's also, it's one of those things where, it's, conflicting bodies of evidence that sometimes it is effective, sometimes it doesn't have an effect. So because we've used it from the start, it's been part of our mitigation package, that's why we're driven to continue using it. But I think cost, it does add a significant cost to the operation. It's not just manufacturing paint, which is reasonably expensive. You've got to use a helicopter to put out the tops, high points, you've got to replenish it. So yeah, it does add a cost to it.
How do you cope with other species like whenua and water?
Luckily in South Western, we've got one or two weka on camera. There's very few, but the further north you go up the coast and in other places, you're going to end up with those. Moorhawk's relatively interesting when it comes to 1080 as a tool. I was fortunate enough to hear Colin Bishop talk about this on my field recently, but DOC have radio transmitted over 100 moorhawk through aerial 1080 operations, and they've never lost one to secondary poisoning. I think moorhawk, I don't quote me on this because I'm not an ecologist there, but I think they prefer fresh prey as opposed to feeding on carrion or dead stuff. And so, yeah, for whatever reason, they don't seem to be as at risk to secondary poisoning as other species.
So is that true for them?
Yeah, again, for us, hard species to kind of monitor over time. Some of those passerines that we get on our cameras ground, either in the feeding in the ground, we can track really nicely, and so we can sort of see what happens to their populations at the back end of operations, and then they start taking off as the stoats disappear. For species like we don't get that unless we go out and look for it. But I believe that the department's keeping these comments on this one. So sorry, I can't see. Yeah, so using the presence or absence of those species to see how we're going. Yeah. It's a good question. And I should say as well that Zip's expertise really to the removal of the predators to now the violence brush. We actually need biodiversity monitoring to plus the department expertise. But saying that we have opportunities like the care, which is a mutual interest of ours, the department to monitor. And then in that impact report, which I encourage you to have a look at, it's got the trends for all of those bird species currently. So we definitely see one of those. And yeah, whether we're using as indicators, I'm not sure. The acoustic recording is an area I think that's of real interest for the predator-free movement, and not just from a point of view of can we detect predators via acoustics, but even if you ever look at the opportunities like a biodiversity credit, for example, you're going to have a way of quantifying biodiversity. It's not just we read monitoring sources of birds. Yeah, so the acoustic recorder, I think, is something that will become more and more commonplace. And there's an awful lot of, I know there's a lot of development going on. It's basically looking at university scientists that's working on acoustic recorders for birds. Our lab manager who now works out for rats to do a PhD on bellbird vocalization. So yeah, it's a growing space.
Just wondering, have you seen
Mice are often in the too hard basket. Have you seen any responsive mice there?
Yeah, no, that's something we do track and keep a tight eye on for many reasons. One, we're very interested in what happens to mice when we take rats and stoats out of the population. But also, somewhere like South Westland, lizards are starting to do really, really well now. I want to make sure that we maintain those gains for lizards. So what we usually do is we compare mouse trends, say, predator-free South Westland to mouse trends elsewhere in the country, because as you know, mouse trends crash and build and stuff. And so we track that quite closely, and we're still seeing the same trends of mice in South Westland. They're still building, they're still crashing. It's not like they're building and holding at a high level. But again, yeah, I'll talk to maybe to love you for
Situation.
Cool. Yep. So in terms of the early days of ZIP, benefited very much. So ZIP spun out as an offshoot, if you like, of the Department of Conservation. So our first 3 people were DOC people, and they came out of the engineering and science and technical team of DOC. So in the early days, they were pretty much purely DOC funded. We had a very lucky break in the early days of ZIP, which was the 1080 milk powder scare. And what that did was force the dairy industries to collaborate. Well, if we're going to protect our dairy factories from pest incursion, we're going to find some alternative ways of dealing with pests like the 1080. So there was a big injection of cash early from the dairy industry. That's dropped out over time, but that enabled us to build the 2-hectare facility we got down at JML. It enabled a whole lot of things, development, like improvements and predator fencing and stuff. So that was a big one. For us now, our number one and biggest funder is still the Department of Conservation. For a long time in the last decade, it's philanthropic investment. And so the idea of philanthropic investment there was to establish that, get the tools and techniques sorted so that then the work could start to be funded through the Department of Conservation. And there's an agreement that exists between the Next Foundation, which represents that philanthropy, and the Department of Conservation, known as the tuatara Accord. And basically what that is that any money that used to go into the cyclic use of 1080 and pest suppression in South Westland now contributes to the maintenance of that site. So yeah, there's some really clever and some really generous people involved in that funding. Well, I mentioned it briefly. We've got this project set up to investigate the potential link between managing browsers and forests and any potential increases of carbon stocks. And if we were successful in working with those groups in proving that link and proving that increase in carbon stocks, then there's an opportunity in the future to maybe fund this work through carbon. A whole lot of work needs to happen to enable that. One of the challenges we've got in that space is obviously proving things up, but we would be talking about quite a small change in carbon stock if it exists. We're talking about 0.25 tonnes of carbon per hectare. But actually, that small amount of carbon would be more than enough to generate enough for predator domination work. So, although it's a very small amount of carbon, you may look at it and go, well, it could have huge implications in the future. And so that's why we're so interested in it. That's why we spend so much time. We're also excited about other opportunities for funding in the future, like the biodiversity credit market. Our innovation doesn't just stop at killing predators. Innovate funding so different.
Thank you, Tom. Please join me in thanking Tom for such a fantastic talk. That was really interesting and certainly gives us an image of what the intent of predator-free New Zealand is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Try not to get a trip hazard. We do have much appreciated coming over and give us coming down the road. Coming down the road, but it's actually coming on campus and sharing with. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I won't be serving beers tonight, but I understand we can.
You can indeed. So I welcome everyone to socialize, network. That is the point of these vibes. And thank you for coming along. It's wonderful to see so many people.